A human screamed in agony as the alien sank its proboscis into his neck, sucking out a viscous golden nectar and dooming him to a slow, withering death. The year was 2257, and Philip Robinson, destitute and living on the grimy streets of New Seattle, writhed against the alley wall as the mysterious Iridian named Raxor drained the precious substance from his body. Philip had initially balked when the cloaked Raxor approached him, offering an exorbitant sum of galactic credits for a vial of his human male nectar. But desperation had pushed the 28-year-old to agree, following the alien into the dimly lit back alley. He watched in detached horror as Raxor extracted the glowing golden liquid from his neck with an alien device, the Iridian muttering about its rarity and potency. The moment the vial was full, Raxor transferred a small fortune into Philip's account and vanished into the shadows without a word. Dazed, Philip stumbled back to his squalid apartment and began frantically researching this so-called human male nectar on the interstellar net. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. An underground black market existed, where the galaxy's wealthy elite paid top dollar for the mysterious substance secreted only by human males. Rumored to reverse aging and grant enhanced strength and vitality, the nectar was most potent when harvested from men in their physical prime, usually their late 20s to early 30s, Philip's exact age. This explained why the poverty-stricken streets of New Seattle, filled with desperate young men, had become a prime hunting ground for nectar collectors like Raxor. As the horrible realization sank in, Philip knew he was caught in a trap that could either make him rich or destroy him utterly. Selling human biological material was strictly illegal under international law. A single vial could earn him a lifetime sentence in the brutal iridium mines on Jupiter's moon. But the chance to finally escape the gutters was too tempting to ignore, even if it meant risking everything. Light years away, the alien aristocrat Raxor held up the vial of glowing nectar, a vicious smile twisting his features. For decades he had built a vast clandestine empire on the human nectar trade, keeping his dealings secret from the Iridian orthodoxy at any cost. The precious fluid had kept Raxor young and vital for nearly a century. And this new acquisition, fresh from the young human male, promised to be his most potent dose yet. The game was just beginning. In the weeks following his fateful encounter with Raxor, Philip's life took a drastic turn. Desperation and greed consumed him, propelling him headfirst into the treacherous world of the human male nectar trade. With a black market extraction device procured from a shady Iridian contact, Philip began secretly milking his own nectar on a regular basis. Each extraction left him weakened and shaky, but the sight of those glowing golden vials filled him with a perverse sense of pride and power. He carefully stored the nectar, waiting for Raxor to contact him again for another lucrative sale. Philip's patience paid off when, weeks later, Raxor reached out with an even more exorbitant offer for a larger quantity of his potent nectar. Flush with his newfound wealth, Philip had already moved into a luxurious penthouse apartment in the upper levels of New Seattle. He readily agreed to the deal, arranging to meet Raxor in an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. The night of the exchange, Philip entered the dilapidated warehouse clutching a briefcase filled with dozens of nectar vials. Raxor emerged from the shadows, flanked by two silent, heavily armed Krokoth bodyguards. The reptilian brutes, eyes glinting beneath hooded cloaks, took up positions on either side of their master. Raxor approached Philip, his gaze fixated on the briefcase. "Let me see the merchandise," he hissed, extending a spindly, clawed hand. Philip swallowed hard and opened the case, revealing rows of softly glowing golden vials. Raxor inspected the nectar, nodding approvingly at the increased volume and purity. "Excellent. You've done well, huh?" A sudden explosion rocked the warehouse, cutting off Raxor's words. Philip stumbled, nearly losing his grip on the open briefcase. Shouts and laser fire erupted outside, accompanied by the unmistakable whine of police sirens. Chaos erupted as a dozen armored NSPD officers stormed into the warehouse, laser rifles blazing. Raxor's Krokoth bodyguards reacted instantly, returning fire with searing green plasma bolts that lit up the dimly lit space. Philip's heart hammered in his throat as he realized the deal had been compromised. Thinking quickly, he snapped the briefcase shut and made a desperate run for a small side exit, narrowly evading a hail of laser fire that scorched the ground at his heels. Through the smoke and chaos, Philip caught a glimpse of Raxa activating a personal force field that shimmered around his body. The Iridian then touched a device on his wrist, shimmering out of visibility as he cloaked himself and followed Philip's escape route. Pulse pounding in his ears, Philip burst out of the warehouse into the cool night air. The case of incriminating Nectar clutched tightly to his chest. He ran blindly, weaving through darkened alleys until the sounds of the raid faded behind him. Only then did he dare to stop, gasping for breath as the horrifying realization sank in. He was now a wanted criminal. With no other choice, Philip used a series of untraceable credit transfers to bribe his way past the spaceport security checkpoints. He stowed away on a decrepit cargo freighter bound for the lawless frontier systems, where he hoped to sell his illicit wares and start a new life free from the NSPD's reach. Light years away, Raxa stormed into his starship hangar, still cloaked and seething with barely contained rage. The betrayal at the warehouse could only mean one thing. A rival Iridian Nectar kingpin had tipped off the authorities in an attempt to eliminate him. Aboard his sleek black starship, Raxa immediately contacted a network of notorious bounty hunters and black market assassins. He would track down Philip and retrieve the lost Nectar, regardless of the cost. As the battered freighter carried Philip through the void of space, the young man stared out a grimy viewport at the endless expanse of stars. The weight of his choices bore down on him, the realization that he was now a fugitive in a deadly game played by powers far beyond his understanding. But with a fortune in stolen Nectar hidden in his quarters, and the tantalizing prospect of a new beginning awaiting him, Philip steeled his purpose. He knew navigating the treacherous underbelly of the galactic Nectar trade would take every ounce of his wit and courage. One false move could spell his doom, but Philip was determined to survive. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would forge a new path and leave his old life behind. The hunt was on. Philip's heart pounded as the freighter shuddered, dropping out of hyperspace. The ship's old hull groaned, stressed by the sudden deceleration. He gripped the back of Zorux's chair, fingers tightening as the Zixian captain's 3 arms flew over the controls. The sleek black shape of the Iridian interceptor loomed before them, weapon ports glowing an ominous red. Philip's stomach lurched. He'd known Raxa wouldn't give up easily, but this soon. "They're hailing us," Zorux growled, jabbing a button with one of his scaly fingers. A harsh voice crackled over the comm. "Unidentified freighter. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate destruction." Philip's mind raced. The vials of Nectar were hidden in his quarters. Maybe if he... Philip raised his hands, heart hammering. "Wait, I can explain!" The Krokoth tore through the ship, ripping open cargo containers. Philip winced at each crash and bang. Zorux shot him a withering glare. Desperation clawed at Philip's throat. "Wait, I have a proposition." Raxa paused, one eyebrow raised. "Oh?" Words tumbled from Philip's mouth. "I'll be your supplier, exclusive. More Nectar than you've ever had before. Just don't kill me." Silence stretched. Philip held his breath. Finally, Raxa's thin lips curled into a cruel smile. "Intriguing," the Iridian purred. "You have spirit, I'll grant you that. Very well, but cross me again." He leaned in close, breath hot on Philip's face. "I'll drain you dry myself." Relief flooded Philip, followed quickly by icy dread. What had he just agreed to? The Iridians left as abruptly as they'd arrived. Philip slumped into a chair, legs weak. Zorux's gravelly voice cut through the silence. "You're in deep shit now, kid. Iridians don't forgive, and they sure as hell don't forget." Philip nodded numbly, mind blown. He'd escaped death, but at what cost? There was no going back now. He was in the game, whether he liked it or not. Philip stepped out of Raxa's opulent chamber, his arms laden with the glittering treasures he'd been given. The Krokoth guards flanked him silently as he made his way through the winding corridors of the Iridian starship. The vessel hummed softly as it glided through the swirling, iridescent clouds of the Riza Nebula. Through the massive viewports lining the halls, Philip caught glimpses of cosmic dust and gas painting fantastical shapes across the void. Under different circumstances, he might have marveled at the breathtaking alien vistas, but now his mind raced with the implications of what had just transpired. He reached his assigned quarters, far more luxurious than anything he'd known on Earth, yet still feeling like a gilded prison cell. As the door slid shut behind him, Philip dumped his newfound riches onto the bed. Gems clinked and rolled across the silken sheets. Ornate jewelry glinted in the soft ambient lighting. Philip sank into a plush chair, his body suddenly feeling heavy and drained. He pulled up his sleeve, revealing angry red puncture marks dotting the crook of his arm. The extraction process Raxa had provided was efficient, but far from painless. Each milking session left him feeling hollowed out, both physically and mentally. "Computer," Philip called out, his voice hoarse. "How long until we reach the rendezvous point?" "Arrival at coordinates in the Riza Nebula, estimated in 37 standard hours," the AI replied smoothly. Philip nodded absently, his gaze fixed on the treasure strewn across his bed. He'd done it. He'd secured wealth beyond his wildest dreams. So why did he feel so empty? Raxa's mocking words echoed in his mind. "Enjoy the gilded cage you've purchased for yourself, little human." A gilded cage indeed. Philip was no fool. He knew full well that his meteoric rise from street urchin to wealthy supplier had come at a terrible cost. There would be no going back to his old life now. He was in too deep, his very essence fueling the twisted desires of alien elites. Yet even as revulsion and self-loathing churned in his gut, Philip couldn't deny the intoxicating allure of his new existence, the power, the luxury, the promise of experiences beyond human imagination. He rose unsteadily and made his way to the viewport, pressing his forehead against the cool material as he stared out at the cosmic tapestry beyond. Somewhere out there, amid the swirling nebula clouds, lay the next step in his journey. What strange and terrible wonders awaited him at this clandestine rendezvous? Philip closed his eyes, feeling the gentle thrum of the ship's engines. There was no turning back now. He'd made his choice. All he could do was see it through, no matter where this path might lead. The opulent chamber on Ixora pulsed with ethereal light, casting prismatic shadows across the writhing forms of alien revelers. Philip stood at the edge of the crowd, his head swimming from the latest extraction. The puncture marks on his arm throbbed as he watched Raxa emerge from the Vitrium baptistry, skin glistening with golden droplets. The Iridian's eyes locked onto Philip, a predatory gleam in their depths. "Behold, my esteemed guests," Raxa's voice boomed across the chamber, "the source of our rejuvenation." Dozens of alien faces turned toward Philip, a hungry intensity in their gazes. He felt exposed, stripped bare before their covetous stares. A Krokoth guard nudged him forward, and Philip stumbled into the center of the room. Raxa circled him, running a clawed finger along Philip's arm. "Such potency in such a fragile vessel," the Iridian purred. "Who would have thought a mere human could hold the key to eternal youth?" The assembled aliens murmured in agreement, pressing closer. Philip's skin crawled as tentacles and appendages brushed against him, probing and curious. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "Another round," someone shouted, and the crowd cheered. Before Philip could protest, Raxa's procurers descended upon him with their extraction devices. He gritted his teeth as the needles plunged into his flesh, drawing forth more of his precious nectar. The aliens watched in rapt fascination as vial after vial filled with the golden liquid. As the extraction continued, Philip's vision blurred. The chamber seemed to tilt and spin around him. Through the haze, he caught glimpses of the debauchery unfolding, aliens consuming his essence in myriad forms, their bodies twisting and reshaping as the nectar worked its transformative magic. A cold clarity cut through Philip's stupor. This couldn't go on. He was more than just a resource to be drained dry. With trembling hands, he pushed away the extraction devices, earning surprised looks from the procurers. "Enough," Philip rasped, his voice barely audible above the din of the party. Raxa's eyes narrowed. "What was that, my golden goose?" Philip squared his shoulders, meeting the Iridian's gaze. "I said enough. No more extractions tonight." A hush fell over the chamber. Raxa's lips curled into a sneer. "You forget your place, human. You exist to serve us, nothing more." "No," Philip said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm done being your plaything, my nectar, my choice." Raxa's hand shot out, gripping Philip's throat. "You dare defy me?" the Iridian hissed. "I own you, boy. Your very cells belong to me." Philip clawed at Raxa's fingers, gasping for air. The room swam before his eyes, but a fire burned in his chest. With a surge of strength, he broke free of Raxa's grasp, stumbling backward. "I'm not your property," Philip spat, rubbing his throat, "and I'm not going to let you drain me dry." Raxa's eyes blazed with fury. "Guards, restrain him!" As the Krokoth moved to seize Philip, he ducked and weaved through the startled crowd. Aliens recoiled from his touch, as if afraid his defiance might be contagious. Philip's heart raced as he searched for an escape route, knowing full well the consequences of his actions. He spotted a service entrance and lunged for it, slamming his palm against the access panel. The door hissed open, and Philip plunged into the darkness beyond, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind him. As he ran through twisting corridors, Philip's mind raced. He had no illusions about the difficulty of what lay ahead, but for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope. He would find a way to break free from Raxa's grasp and reclaim control of his life and his nectar. The chase was on, and Philip knew the stakes couldn't be higher. His very essence hung in the balance as he fled deeper into the bowels of the Ixaran resort, the first steps on a perilous journey to freedom. Philip's fingers flew across the alien interface, his heart pounding as he activated the isomorphic device. The screen before him flickered, lines of code scrolling past at dizzying speeds. He held his breath, watching as the virus wormed its way into the palace's systems. Suddenly the lights in his chambers flickered and died. Emergency klaxons blared throughout the complex, their wailing punctuated by the muffled sounds of explosions. Philip grinned, knowing his digital assault was already wreaking havoc. He pocketed the data cubes containing the damning evidence and slipped out into the darkened corridor. The once opulent hallways were now bathed in pulsing red emergency lights. Panicked shouts and the thundering of feet echoed from all directions as the palace's security forces scrambled to respond to the phantom threats he'd created. As Philip rounded a corner, he nearly collided with a group of Krokoth guards. Their reptilian eyes widened in recognition. Philip didn't hesitate. He ducked under the guards' grasping claws and sprinted past them, his feet pounding against the ornate floor. The Krokoth gave chase, their heavy footfalls growing closer with each passing second. He skidded around another corner, frantically searching for an escape route. Up ahead he spotted a service hatch. With a burst of desperate energy, Philip threw himself at the panel, praying it would open. After what felt like an eternity, Philip emerged into a vast hangar bay. Sleek spacecraft of various alien designs sat silent and dark, their systems disrupted by his viral assault. He darted from ship to ship, searching for one small enough to pilot alone. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Oh, Philip, did you really think you could outmaneuver me?" Philip spun around to see Raxa emerging from the shadows, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. The Iridian's eyes gleamed with a mixture of rage and grudging admiration. "I must admit your little revolution has been quite inconvenient," Raxa continued, taking a step closer. "But surely you realize the futility of your actions. You're but one human against the might of our entire consortium." Philip's mind raced, searching for a way out. His gaze fell upon a small, agile-looking craft just a few meters away. If he could reach it... "You're wrong, Raxa," Philip said, edging towards the ship. "I'm not alone. There are others out there who won't stand for your exploitation. This is just the beginning. Raxa's eyes narrowed. Seize him! As the guards lunged forward, Philip made his move. He sprinted for the spacecraft, energy blasts scorching the deck around him. With a desperate leap, he cleared the short distance to the cockpit, slamming his hand against the emergency release. The canopy hissed open, and Philip threw himself inside just as Raxa's enraged roar echoed through the hangar. His hands flew over the unfamiliar controls, praying he could decipher enough to get the ship airborne. The engine sputtered to life, and Philip felt a surge of hope. He yanked back on what he hoped was the throttle, and the small craft lurched upward. Through the viewscreen, he saw Raxa's furious face growing smaller as the ship rocketed towards the hangar's force field. Alarms blared within the cockpit as Philip pushed the engines to their limit. The shimmering barrier loomed closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, he feared he wouldn't make it through. Then, with a bone-jarring impact, the ship punched through the force field and into open space. The vast, star-studded expanse of the cosmos stretched out before him, a promise of freedom and purpose. As Philip's stolen craft streaked away from the Ixaran pleasure palace, he knew his journey was not nearly finished. The data cubes in his pocket held the key to exposing the Xenophile Consortium's atrocities. Now, he just had to stay alive long enough to use it. The ship's comm system crackled to life and Philip tensed, expecting to hear Raxa's threats. Instead, a new voice tinged with static came through. Philip's eyes widened as he realized his audacious attempt had caught the attention of the very allies he needed. With trembling hands, he input the provided coordinates, setting course for an uncertain but hopeful future. The throne chamber erupted into chaos as energy blasts and plasma bolts crisscrossed the air. Philip ducked behind an overturned table, the acrid stench of burning upholstery filling his nostrils. His hands shook as he gripped the unfamiliar neutron lancer, its weight a constant reminder of how far he'd come from being a simple supplier. To his left, a rebel commando's head exploded in a spray of gore as a Castellax guard's shot found its mark. Philip fought down the urge to vomit, forcing himself to focus on the objective. The Sacrum Vault. They had to reach it. He watched as the rebel leader vaulted over a smoldering barricade, her lithe form a blur of motion as she weaved through the hail of enemy fire. Philip took a deep breath and rose from his cover, squeezing off a series of wild shots at the advancing cyborg juggernauts. The recoil nearly knocked him off his feet, but he saw one of the monstrous creations stumble as a bolt struck its knee joint. Demiurge reached the sealed blast doors, her cybernetic arm interfacing with the locking mechanism. Sparks flew as she worked to override the security protocols. Philip scrambled to her position, pressing his back against the wall and continuing to fire at their attackers. "How long?" he shouted over the cacophony of battle. 30 seconds, Demiurge replied, her voice strained. "Just keep them off me." A massive Castellax guard lumbered towards them, its armor pockmarked with rebel fire, but still advancing relentlessly. Philip's lancer clicked empty, and he tossed it aside in frustration. Unarmed and terrified, he watched the juggernaut raise its arm, preparing to unleash a devastating blast. Suddenly, a rebel commando slammed into the cyborg from behind, magnetic grapples latching onto its armor. The guard flailed, trying to dislodge its attacker, but the commando held fast. With a final, desperate act, the rebel jammed an explosive charge into a gap in the cyborg's armor and leapt clear. The resulting explosion rocked the chamber, showering Philip and Demiurge with debris. As the smoke cleared, Philip saw the mangled remains of both commando and guard strewn across the floor. "It's done," Demiurge exclaimed as the blast doors began to slide open with a pneumatic hiss. "Everyone fall back to the vault." Philip stumbled through the opening, the surviving rebels pouring in behind him. As the doors sealed shut once more, he found himself in a cavernous chamber filled with row upon row of stasis pods. Each translucent cylinder contained a floating figure, countless victims of the Xenophile cartel's insatiable appetite for resources. "By the stars," Philip whispered, his eyes wide as he took in the horrific scope of Raxa's operation. Demiurge strode purposefully to a central control console, her fingers flying over the alien interface. "We don't have much time," she said. "Philip, start downloading everything you can from these terminals. We need irrefutable proof of their crimes." Philip's hands moved frantically across the console, praying that the precious data would download before Raxa's forces broke through. With each passing second, the pounding on the vault doors grew louder, a stark reminder that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Philip's lungs burned as he sprinted through the smoke-filled corridor, the acrid stench of burning circuitry and ozone filling his nostrils. Plasma bolts sizzled past, leaving scorched trails on the ornate walls. He dove behind a fallen pillar, his heart pounding in his ears. "Demiurge," he shouted over the cacophony of battle. "We need to push forward." The rebel leader's cybernetic eye glowed an eerie red as she scanned the battlefield. "Quarren berserkers, form up! Create a wedge formation!" Massive armored aliens lumbered into position, their thick hides absorbing incoming fire without flinching. Philip watched in awe as they advanced, molecular charges detonating with thunderous force against the Castellax juggernauts. An iron sapien android crouched beside Philip, its metallic face impassive. "Human, your neutron lancer is needed. Target the weak points in their armor joints." Philip nodded, hefting the unfamiliar weapon. He peered over cover, squinting through the haze. A Castellax enforcer loomed ahead, its arm cannon glowing with building energy. Philip took a deep breath, steadying his aim. He squeezed the trigger. The rebel forces inched forward, gaining ground meter by bloody meter. Philip's ears rang from the constant barrage of weapons fire and explosions. He caught glimpses of Raxa through the chaos, the Iridian's face contorted with rage behind his ionic barrier. Suddenly the ground trembled. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the chamber. Philip's blood ran cold as he saw Raxa's triumphant grin. Before she could answer, a monstrous form emerged from the smoldering breach. The Xenobrochia towered over the battlefield, its nanoceramic armor gleaming beneath crackling force fields. Weapon systems bristled from every surface, each one capable of obliterating whole squads. "Behold," Raxa's voice boomed, "the consecrated form of your vaunted rebellion's utter negation." Philip watched in horror as the colossal juggernaut's weapons began to glow with building energy. He knew they had mere seconds before annihilation. "We have to take it down," he yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. Ignoring Demiurge's warnings, Philip sprinted towards the Xenobrochia. His legs burned with exertion as he ducked and weaved through the maelstrom of combat. Somehow, miraculously, he reached the behemoth's feet, unscathed. Up close, the Xenobrochia was even more terrifying. Its armor hummed with otherworldly power. Philip's eyes darted across its surface, searching for any vulnerability. There, nestled between armored plates, he spotted strange glyphs etched into the metal. Without hesitation, Philip raised his neutron lancer and fired. The weapon's entire payload slammed into the alien circuitry. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a screech of tortured metal, the Xenobrochia began to convulse. "Run!" Philip screamed, already sprinting away from the failing juggernaut. The explosion that followed was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. A wave of pure force lifted Philip off his feet, hurling him through the air. He slammed into the ground, vision blurring as consciousness threatened to slip away. When the ringing in his ears subsided, Philip pushed himself up on shaking arms. The throne room was devastated, great swathes of it simply gone. Through the settling dust, he saw the exposed archway of the sacrum vault. Demiurge appeared at his side, her cybernetic implants sparking. "The vault, it's open," she said, her voice filled with equal parts awe and trepidation. Philip struggled to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. He met Demiurge's gaze, seeing the weight of their mission reflected there. Without a word, they began to move towards the breached vault, ready to confront whatever horrors lay within. Philip stumbled forward, his boots splashing through puddles of viscous xenochemicals, as he followed Demiurge deeper into the sacrum vault. The air burned his lungs, filled with acrid smoke and the stench of dissolving flesh. His eyes watered as he took in the horrific sights surrounding them. Towering vitrium cylinders lined the cavernous chamber, each filled with churning, noxious fluids. Within these vast alembics, Philip saw twisted forms writhing in agony, beings warped beyond recognition, their very cellular structure harvested to fuel Raxa's vile creations. A Quarren rebel to Philip's left doubled over, retching violently at the sight. Philip fought down his own nausea, forcing himself to keep moving. "By all the stars," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "what have they done?" Demiurge's cybernetic eye glowed an eerie red as she scanned the chamber. "This is only the beginning, Philip. The true horror awaits us ahead." They pressed on, deeper into the blood-dimmed corridors of the vault. Philip's hand trembled as he gripped his weapon, every nerve screaming at him to flee this place of nightmares. Suddenly the passageway opened into a vast central grotto. Philip's jaw dropped as he beheld the monstrous effigy dominating the chamber, a towering construct of fused bone and warped flesh, pulsing with unholy life. At its base, Philip saw Raxor hovering within a shimmering energy field. The Iridian's withered face contorted with maniacal glee as he beheld the intruders. With a gesture, Raxor activated the grotesque mechanism. The effigy's massive mouthparts shuddered to life, absorbing a torrent of glowing fluid. Philip watched in horror as the processed slurry began to rain down into waiting basins. From hidden alcoves, hunched figures emerged, Raxa's inner circle of sycophants. They lurched towards the basins, eager to partake in their master's unholy communion. Philip's mind reeled as the full scope of the atrocity before him became clear. This was the xenophile aristocracy's ultimate goal, to render countless sentient species into narcotic elixirs for their own twisted pleasure. Beside him, Demiurge's cybernetic implants crackled with building energy. Her voice cut through Philip's daze like a knife. Without hesitation, Philip raised his weapon and fired. Scintillating bolts of energy lanced out, striking the churning xenochemical reservoirs. Across the chamber, more explosions erupted as the rebel forces unleashed their assault. Raxa's triumphant laughter turned to shrieks of rage as his sanctum erupted into chaos. Torrents of highly reactive chemicals flooded the chamber, igniting into sheets of blue-green flame. As Philip retreated towards the exit, he saw the massive effigy begin to dissolve, its unholy form consumed by the very substances it had been designed to process. Raxa's howls of defiance were drowned out by the roar of destruction sweeping through the vault. Philip's world exploded into searing white light. The force of Demiurge's final salvo slammed into him, hurling his body through the air like a rag doll. His ears rang, drowning out the cacophony of destruction all around. For a moment, he floated in a sea of blinding radiance, disconnected from the chaos below. Then gravity reasserted itself. Philip crashed onto the deck of a blast cruiser, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He gasped, struggling to breathe as acrid smoke filled his nostrils. Through watering eyes, he saw rebel troops scrambling to secure hatches and man-weapon stations. "Move! We're not clear yet." A Quarren soldier hauled Philip to his feet, shoving him towards the ship's interior. Philip stumbled forward, his legs shaky beneath him. The blast cruiser shuddered as it accelerated, inertial dampeners straining to compensate. Through viewports, he caught glimpses of other rebel ships, their hulls scarred and burning as they clawed for altitude. "Demiurge to all ships," the rebel leader's voice crackled over the comms. "Maintain formation and prepare for slipstream jump. Rearguard, hold those iridendroi back." Philip grabbed a railing as the ship banked hard, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire from below. He watched in horror as writhing tendrils of biomechanical horror latched onto one of the lagging cruisers, dragging it back towards the inferno below. The ship's weapons officer barked orders, coordinating with other vessels to create a wall of turbo-lance fire. Beams of coherent energy lanced downward, carving swathes of destruction through the surging iridendroi horde. But for every monstrosity vaporized, two more took its place. Philip's stomach lurched as reality itself seemed to twist. The stars outside elongated into streaks of light, and Ixora's burning surface fell away. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed Raxa's face contorted in fury, the Iridian Grandee's augmented form silhouetted against the flames of his ruined sanctum. Then they were gone, hurtling through the slipstream. Philip sagged against the bulkhead, his body trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Around him, rebel crew members worked feverishly to assess damage and tend to the wounded. "You made it, human," Demiurge's voice startled him. The rebel leader's cybernetic eye glowed as she regarded Philip. "But our fight is far from finished. The data you recovered from the Sacrum Vault will ignite a firestorm across the galaxy. The xenophil cartels won't take this lying down." Philip nodded, his throat too raw to speak. He thought of the horrors he'd witnessed, the lives lost and the battles yet to come. As the blast cruiser hurtled through the void, he knew, with grim certainty, that this was only the beginning. The searing celestia chemical brilliance engulfed Philip. His body hurled through a maelstrom of light and heat. Shrapnel tore at his flesh as he tumbled amid the chaos, the acrid stench of vaporizing xenomorph biomatter filling his nostrils. With a bone-jarring impact, he slammed into the floor of a dimly lit chamber. Gasping for breath, Philip's eyes darted around the cramped space. Emergency force field emitters crackled to life, containing the thunderous shockwaves that threatened to tear the evacuation chamber apart. Through the haze of smoke and pain, he saw the battered forms of his fellow rebels strewn across the floor. Moans of agony filled the air as the wounded clung to life. The whine of fusion thrusters pierced the cacophony. Philip felt a surge of hope. They were aboard one of the surviving blast cruisers, preparing to escape the inferno that had consumed Ixora. Gritting his teeth against the searing pain of his burns and lacerations, Philip tried to push himself upright. His muscles screamed in protest, and he collapsed back to the deck. Through watering eyes, he saw a towering silhouette moving through the smoke-filled chamber. "Well struck, human," Demiurge's voice, harsh and mechanical, cut through the din. The rebel leader's armored exo-chassis bore scorch marks, but she remained functional. Her cybernetic hands worked swiftly to stabilize the chamber's failing systems. "Our insertion became a total immolation event, but the Xenophile's sanctum imploded, and we denied Raxa his prize this day. You fought with resolution in the face of infinity." Philip's mind reeled, struggling to process the scale of destruction they had unleashed. He crawled to a nearby viewport, peering through its slitted apertures. The void beyond seethed with roiling clouds of celestial debris. Ghostly flashes of escaping energy danced amid the chaos, the last vestiges of Raxa's shattered sanctum. I thought I saw the end of Raxa in that firestorm," Philip rasped, his throat raw from the acrid smoke. "Is he truly finished?" Demiurge's cybernetic eyes flickered as she shook her head. "Not even complete atomic sublimation can erase the Xenophile's legacy on this vector, Philip Robinson. That conflict transcends the personal feud with Raxor alone. It will be waged across all existence, now that his inner sanctums have been breached, his cartel's depravities laid bare for the infinite cosmos to witness." A shudder ran through Demiurge's combat endoskeleton, her voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "What I witnessed within those unholy awnings, that represented an existential defilement of all sentient life itself. Even in utter strategic victory, we may have only propagated a new permutation of the meta-conflict, on a scale beyond our reckoning." Resonant subpulses began to thrum through the chamber as the ship prepared for slipstream transition. Philip fought to stay conscious, his vision swimming. A ghostly projection of galactic star maps coalesced around Demiurge, cryptic vectors shifting in crimson patterns. "Hold firm, soldier," Demiurge commanded as the final countdown began. "We will slipstream beyond the Xenophile's stalking grasp for now, but know this, the ideological theater has merely widened off our initial foray. There will be no surrendering the autonomy of all life from existential exploitation and rapture." The words echoed in Philip's mind as reality itself seemed to twist. His body was engulfed by cascading waves of hyperspatial energy. As consciousness slipped away, Philip caught one last fractured glimpse of the cosmos unraveling around him in surreal infinitude. The battle against the Xenophiles' depravity had ascended to a new arena, its consequences rippling outward across the very fabric of existence. Philip's body tensed as the med-chamber vibrated with increasing intensity. The ergon lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows across the rows of biobeds. He gripped the edges of his bunk, fingers tightening as the Promethea's engines roared to life. "Slipstream translation imminent," the droid nurse announced, its appendages frantically adjusting Philip's IV lines. "Brace for spatial distortion." A low-pitched hum filled the air, growing steadily in volume and frequency. Philip's ears popped as the pressure in the chamber fluctuated wildly. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting a wave of nausea as reality itself seemed to twist and warp around him. With a violent lurch, the Promethea tore through the fabric of space-time. Philip's stomach lurched as his body was pulled in 1,000 directions at once. For an eternal instant, he existed everywhere and nowhere, his consciousness stretched across the cosmos. Then, with a bone-jarring snap, they emerged back into normal space. Philip gasped, gulping in air as his senses reoriented. The med-chamber stabilized, ergon lamps steadying to a constant glow. "Translation complete," the droid nurse intoned. "Vital signs returning to baseline parameters." Philip struggled to sit up, ignoring the servitor's attempts to keep him immobilized. His eyes were drawn to the holographic displays surrounding his biobed. The star charts had shifted dramatically, now centering on an unfamiliar system dominated by a bloated red giant. Demiurge's hologram flickered back to life, her cybernetic gaze piercing through Philip. "We have arrived at the threshold, soldier. Before us lies Nix-9, primary breeding nexus for the Xenophile cartel's most virulent strains." The holograms expanded, revealing a nightmarish hellscape of a planet. Vast orbital structures writhed with biomechanical tendrils, pulsing with unholy life. The planet's surface was a churning mass of flesh and metal, dotted with cyclopean spires that reached hungrily toward the stars. "Our strike teams are mobilizing as we speak," Demiurge continued, her voice laden with grim purpose. "This will be no surgical insertion, Philip Robinson. We go to unleash holy fire upon the very womb of our enemy's twisted ambitions." Philip's head swam as he absorbed the magnitude of what lay before them. The sheer scale of the Xenophile stronghold dwarfed anything they'd faced on Ixora. He opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by a sudden klaxon blaring through the ship's comm systems. The med-chamber erupted into frenzied activity. Wounded rebels staggered from their biobeds, grabbing for weapons and armor. Philip felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins, burning away the last vestiges of sedation. "To arms, soldier," Demiurge commanded, her hologram flickering out of existence. "The breeding grounds of Nix-9 await our cleansing flame. Show these abominations the true meaning of humanity's wrath." Philip tore the IV lines from his arm, ignoring the sharp pain as he stumbled to his feet. A nearby rebel tossed him a pulse rifle, its weight comforting in his hands. As he checked the weapon's charge, Philip caught a glimpse through a nearby viewport of the nightmare that awaited them. Swarms of chitinous horrors filled the void, their biomechanical forms twisting in ways that defied sanity. Behind them loomed the vast orbital structures of Nix-9, pulsing with malevolent purpose. The true test of humanity's purpose against the Xenophile threat had only just begun. Philip's head swam as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. The pulsing lights of the Narcissus pierced his vision, a stark contrast to the chaos of battle he'd left behind. He blinked, trying to clear the fog from his mind. "Where am I?" Philip mumbled, his fingers digging into the plush cushions beneath him. The soft fabric felt alien against his skin, so different from the cold metal of the Promethea's deck. Demiurge's cybernetic eye glowed softly as she leaned in close. "You're safe now, Philip. Welcome to the lush fields." Philip's gaze darted around, taking in the surreal landscape. Floating islands drifted lazily through the atmosphere, each a masterpiece of hedonistic design. Gleaming promenades wound through lush gardens, their paths lined with exotic flora that pulsed with bioluminescence. "But the battle! Nix 9! Philip's words trailed off as Raxa placed a hand on his shoulder. "All in the past, my friend," Raxa purred, his voice a stark contrast to the furious roar Philip remembered from Ixora. "Here, we cultivate pleasure, not pain." Philip's fingers brushed against the soft fabric of his tunic. He looked down, startled to find himself clothed in pastel linens, adorned with delicate floral accents. "This isn't... I don't understand." Demiurge guided Philip to his feet, leading him towards one of the nearby cabanas. As they walked, Philip's bare feet sank into moss-covered pathways that seemed to glow with each step. The air grew thick with a cocktail of fragrances, sweet, spicy, and utterly intoxicating. "Your new quarters," Demiurge explained, gesturing to the ornate structure. "Here you'll learn the art of Iridian hospitality." Philip stumbled forward, his pupils dilating. Through the cabana's gossamer curtains he glimpsed pools of shimmering, multi-hued gels and mounds of iridescent powders. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. "No," Philip whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't right. We were fighting the xenophiles." Raxa's laugh rang out, a melodious sound that seemed to ripple through the air. "Fighting? Oh, Philip, that's all behind us now. Here, we embrace a higher purpose, the pursuit of pleasure in all its forms." Philip's hands clenched into fists as he fought against the growing haze in his mind. The scent of clover and freesia threatened to overwhelm his senses. He opened his mouth to protest, but found his voice failing him. Demiurge pressed a small plate into Philip's hands. On it sat an elaborate confection, a swirling anemone of sugar and exotic fruits. "Try it," she urged, her voice a soothing whisper. "Let the flavors open your mind to new possibilities." Philip stared at the offering, his determination wavering. The colors seemed to dance before his eyes, promising sweet oblivion. He raised the treat to his lips, its aroma filling his nostrils. Philip's vision swam as he stumbled forward, the narcotic haze of the dew-iced Paul lollipub clouding his thoughts. The mega-terrarium loomed before him, a vast sphere of alien life pulsing with otherworldly energy. Raxa's words echoed in his ears, but their meaning slipped away like smoke. I don't understand," Philip slurred, his tongue thick in his mouth. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, as the petaline dais at the center of the terrarium seemed to breathe. Demiurge's cybernetic hand pressed against his back, urging him forward. "Your understanding will come, dear Philip. Let the xenogamic essence guide you." The ceremonial pathway beneath his feet felt alive, each step sending ripples of bioluminescence spreading outward. Philip's skin tingled as he passed through curtains of gossamer spores, their delicate touch leaving trails of warmth across his flesh. Around him, the alien flora writhed with apparent sentience. Tendrils of iridescent vines reached out, brushing against his arms and legs. Philip gasped as a surge of electric pleasure coursed through him at each contact. "The Harvestrilia sense your potential," Raxa purred, his aristocratic features alight with anticipation. "They yearn for your essence, human." As they approached the central dais, Philip's eyes widened. The massive structure was composed of interlocking petals, each easily twice his height. They pulsed with a soft, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to resonate deep within his bones. "Well, what do you want from me?" Philip managed to ask, his words slurring together as he fought against the growing fog in his mind. Raxa's laugh was rich and dark. "Want? Oh, Philip, we want to elevate you, to make you the cornerstone of a new age of xenogamic splendor." The metallic tendrils that had emerged from the bioreceptacles now coiled around Philip's ankles, their touch cool against his skin. He tried to pull away, but his limbs felt leaden and unresponsive. "Don't fight it," Demiurge whispered, her cybernetic eyes glowing with an unsettling warmth. "Embrace your destiny as our sacred pollen master." Philip's heart raced as the tendrils began to lift him off the ground, guiding him towards the waiting petals of the central dais. The air grew thick with a cloying, sweet scent that made his head spin. But his protests were lost as the massive petals began to unfurl, revealing a pulsing organic chamber within. The tendrils lowered Philip onto a soft, yielding surface that seemed to mold itself to his body. As the petals began to close around him, Philip caught one last glimpse of the vast terrarium beyond. The alien flora surged with anticipation, fronds and tendrils reaching hungrily towards the dais. Then darkness enveloped him, and Philip felt himself sinking into a sea of sensation beyond anything he had ever experienced. Philip's muscles strained against the metallic tendrils as they coiled tighter around his limbs. The cool alloy sent shivers through his body, a stark contrast to the feverish heat building within him. He thrashed wildly, but the narcotic haze dulled his movements, making them sluggish and uncoordinated. Raxa's laughter echoed through the cavernous chamber, a sound of pure malevolent glee. "Struggle all you want, human. Your essence will fuel our grand design." The Iridian Grandee's elongated fingers danced across the obsidian control prism, sending pulses of eldritch energy surging through the mega-terrarium. Philip felt each wave crash over him, his very atoms seeming to vibrate in response. A tendril brushed against Philip's neck, its surface shifting to reveal a wickedly sharp needle. He jerked his head away, but the metal snake followed, unerring in its pursuit. With a hiss of pressurized air, the needle plunged into his flesh. Philip's scream caught in his throat as liquid fire flooded his veins. Amber fluid, thick and viscous, began to fill the transparent files connected to the tendrils, his precious essence forcibly extracted. "Yes," Raxer crowed, his eyes fixated on the filling vials. "The consecration begins. Feed the Arbor Fronceres, nourish our xenogamic future." Through the haze of pain and chemical rapture, Philip's gaze locked onto the control conduits near the prism. A desperate plan formed in his drug-addled mind. With a primal roar, he lunged forward, seizing one of the undulating tendrils in his grasp. The alloy was slick, threatening to slip from his fingers, but Philip held on with manic strength. He swung the tendril like a frenzied whip, smashing it against the prism's protective casing. Once, twice, 3 times, until finally the housing cracked and shattered. Sparks erupted from the exposed circuitry, as Philip plunged his hands into the mess of wires and crystalline pathways. Pain lanced up his arms as raw energy coursed through him, but he pushed through, frantically rerouting connections and overriding protocols. The megaterrarium shuddered violently. Alien machinery wailed in protest as cascades of uncontrolled power surged through its systems. Philip felt the energies building to a fever pitch, threatening to tear reality itself asunder. Raxa's triumphant expression morphed into one of abject horror. "No, what have you done, you fool?" He lunged for the controls, but it was too late. One by one, the surrounding biomatrices began to crumble. The air filled with the sounds of shattering crystal and tearing organic matter as the carefully cultivated xenogamic lattices collapsed under their own corrupted weight. Philip watched in stunned silence as the fruits of Raxa's twisted ambitions disintegrated before his eyes. The tendrils holding him went slack, allowing him to stumble away from the pulsing, writhing mass of alien tech. As the last vestiges of the megaterrarium structure gave way, Philip felt a shift in the very fabric of reality around him. The consequences of his actions rippled outward, far beyond the confines of this chamber or even this world. He had become the catalyst for something far greater and more terrible than he could have imagined. As waves of distorted energy washed over him, Philip realized that the true battle was only just beginning. The air crackled with eldritch energies as Philip stood at the heart of the unfolding cosmic catastrophe. Reality itself seemed to twist and warp around him, the very fabric of space-time buckling under the strain of Raxa's perverted ambitions. Philip's senses reeled as he struggled to comprehend the mind-bending horror before him. The once pristine megaterrarium had transformed into a nightmarish landscape of writhing, mutant flora. Tendrils of corrupted plant matter snaked across the floor, walls and ceiling, pulsing with an unholy life of their own. "What have I done?" Philip gasped, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alien growth and shattering crystal. Before him, the remnants of Raxa's being continued to morph and expand. The Iridian's flesh bubbled and roiled, sprouting grotesque appendages that defied all natural laws. Philip watched in horrified fascination as Raxa's form collapsed in on itself, only to erupt outward in a riot of pseudo-organic structures. The air grew thick with spores and alien pollen, each breath threatening to corrupt Philip's very essence. He coughed and sputtered, desperately trying to filter the air through his sleeve. Around him, the few surviving Iridian attendants screamed in terror as they succumbed to the ravenous growth. Philip watched helplessly as coiling fronds enveloped their bodies, pumping them full of mutagenic fluids that warped their forms beyond recognition. Philip stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the undulating floor. His gaze was drawn to the pulsating mass that had once been Raxa. The grotesque structure towered over him, a cathedral of corrupted flesh and alien geometries that hurt the mind to look upon. As Philip stared into the writhing core of the abomination, he felt something reaching out to him, not with physical tendrils, but with alien thoughts that clawed at the edges of his sanity. The very concept of his humanity seemed to waver and distort under the onslaught of non-Euclidean cognition. "No!" Philip cried out, clutching his head as incomprehensible visions flooded his mind. He saw the birth and death of universes, the rise and fall of realities beyond human comprehension. The line between self and other, between biology and physics, blurred and dissolved. The corrupted mass that had been Raxa pulsed with newfound purpose, its surface rippling with countless orifices and protrusions. From deep within its core, a sound emerged, not a voice, but a concept that bypassed Philip's ears and resonated directly in his brain. "Join us," it seemed to say, though the words were woefully inadequate to describe the alien communication. "Become one with the new order." Philip's body trembled as he felt his very atoms yearning to merge with the cosmic abomination before him. He stumbled backward, fighting against the pull with every fiber of his being. "I won't," he growled through gritted teeth, even as he felt his grip on reality slipping. "I won't let you win." But even as Philip resisted, he knew that this was only the beginning. The corruption he'd unleashed was spreading far beyond the confines of the mega-terrarium, seeding itself across dimensions and realities. He had become the unwitting catalyst for a cosmic cataclysm, and the true battle for existence itself was only just beginning. Philip's consciousness fractured and splintered, his very essence dissolving into the pulsating alien landscape that engulfed him. The mutant frondworks of the xenogamatorium wrapped around his form, their slimy tendrils burrowing into his flesh. Each point of contact sent shockwaves of sensation coursing through his rapidly disintegrating nervous system. Colors he had never seen before exploded behind his eyes, while impossible sounds reverberated through his bones. The boundaries between his body and the surrounding biomass blurred, his cells merging with the virulent proto-flesh that coated every surface. Philip's mouth opened in a silent scream as monstrous lesions erupted across his skin, spewing forth glistening globules of prismatic matter. He watched in horrified fascination as these droplets coalesced into pulsating sacs of not-quite life, their surfaces rippling with ever-shifting patterns of iridescence. The air itself seemed to thicken and congeal, becoming a viscous soup of half-formed organisms and disembodied sensations. Philip's lungs burned as he tried to breathe, each inhalation flooding his body with alien microbes that rewrote his genetic code on a molecular level. Around him, the once proud structures of Raxa's grand design crumbled into dust, crystalline spires shattered, raining razor-sharp shards that cut through the air like glittering knives. The very foundations of reality seemed to buckle and warp, space and time twisting into impossible configurations. Philip's thoughts scattered like leaves in a hurricane, fragments of memory and identity, torn away by the relentless onslaught of sensory overload. He grasped desperately at the fading remnants of his humanity, trying to anchor himself to something, anything familiar. But it was futile. The tidal wave of alien consciousness swept away the last vestiges of Philip Robinson, human being. In its place, a new entity began to coalesce, a being of pure energy and information, unbound by the limitations of physical form. This new Philip thing pulsed and writhed, its awareness expanding to encompass realms of existence far beyond mortal comprehension. It perceived the universe not as a collection of discrete objects, but as an intricate web of interconnected energies and potentialities. The boundaries between past, present, and future dissolved, revealing the true nature of time as a simultaneous tapestry of infinite possibilities. Philip's transformed consciousness danced along the threads of reality, each moment a gateway to countless parallel worlds. As his apotheosis neared completion, Philip felt himself merging with the very fabric of the cosmos. His individual identity expanded outward, becoming one with the surging currents of primal creation that flowed through all things. And then, at the very peak of this transcendent experience, a single sound erupted from the core of Philip's being. It was a noise beyond language, beyond meaning, a primal utterance that encompassed the totality of his transformation. The sound reverberated through dimensions, carrying with it the echoes of Philip's former humanity and the promise of an existence beyond anything he could have imagined. As the last syllable faded, Philip's consciousness dispersed, becoming one with the eternal dance of creation and destruction that permeated all of reality. Philip's essence pulsed and writhed, a lone spark of coherence amid the churning chaos of the metadimensional expanse. The boundaries of his consciousness stretched and contorted, assaulted by waves of non-Euclidean energies that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of his being. Yet he persisted. All around him, the xenothalids swarmed in ever-tightening spirals. Their eyeless stalks quivered with alien hunger, sensing the anomaly of Philip's undissolved identity. Chitinous appendages lashed out, each touch sending jolts of unnatural sensation through what remained of Philip's perception. He recoiled, desperately clinging to the fragmented memories of his human existence. Names, faces, and experiences flashed through his mind in rapid succession, each one a lifeline to his former self. The xenothalids redoubled their efforts, their grotesque forms merging and splitting in dizzying displays of impossible biology. Tendrils of corrupted matter reached out, seeking to envelop and absorb Philip's resilient core. With monumental effort, Philip condensed his essence further, compressing his will into an impenetrable singularity of selfhood. The strain was immense, threatening to shatter his psyche, but he refused to yield. The assault intensified. Waves of anti-causal energy bombarded Philip from every direction, each impact threatening to unravel the very concepts that defined his existence. Yet for every attack, his perseverance only hardened. Time lost all meaning as the battle raged on. Entire galaxies could have been born and died in the span of what felt like mere moments to Philip's beleaguered consciousness. Still he endured, a defiant mote of humanity amidst an ocean of alien madness. The xenothalids chittered and screeched in frustration, their efforts to assimilate this stubborn spark of individuality repeatedly thwarted. They twisted themselves into ever more grotesque configurations, pushing the limits of their own mutability in their desperation to consume Philip's essence. But Philip would not break. With each passing moment, each test of his will, he found new reserves of strength. The very act of resistance became a beacon, a rallying cry for the tattered remnants of his identity. And so the cosmic struggle continued, a war of attrition between one man's indomitable spirit and the forces of chaotic oblivion. Philip's consciousness teetered on the brink of annihilation. The onslaught of the apex xenothalid Leviathan battered his psyche, each assault threatening to unravel the very fabric of his being. He felt himself stretching, thinning, his essence pulled in opposite directions by forces beyond mortal comprehension. On one side, the void beckoned. It promised an end to struggle, a dissolution into the infinite. Philip could feel its allure, the temptation to simply let go and allow himself to be absorbed into the cosmic soup of endless possibility. So easy, he thought. his mental voice barely a whisper amid the cacophony of alien energies. "Just let go." But even as part of him yearned for that release, another part rebelled. This defiant spark, the core of what made Philip human, blazed with renewed intensity. It refused to yield, to be subsumed or erased. The apex xenothalid sensed this resistance. Its myriad orifices pulsed with frustration, spewing forth new waves of reality-warping energies. Tendrils of antimatter lashed out, each one seeking to puncture Philip's weakening defenses. Philip screamed, but no sound emerged in this realm beyond physics. Instead, his agony manifested as ripples in the fabric of space-time itself. He could feel pieces of himself being torn away, memories and emotions scattering like leaves in a cosmic wind. Yet still he fought on. With monumental effort, Philip gathered the fraying threads of his identity. He focused on the simple fact of his existence, the undeniable truth that he was Philip Robinson, human being. This singular thought became his anchor, a lifeline in the maelstrom of cosmic chaos. The xenothalid Leviathan redoubled its efforts. Its massive bulk writhed and contorted, taking on impossible geometries as it sought to overwhelm Philip's last bastion of selfhood. Waves of non-Euclidean horror washed over him, threatening to drown his consciousness in an ocean of alien madness. Philip felt himself stretched to the very limits of existence. His essence vibrated like a guitar string plucked by the hand of an insane god. At any moment he knew he might snap, his being scattered across infinite dimensions. But he did not break. Instead, drawing upon reserves of will he never knew he possessed, Philip began to push back. He gathered the tattered remnants of his psyche, weaving them into a shield against the xenothalid assault. Bit by bit, fragment by fragment, he reconstructed his sense of self. The apex xenothalid recoiled, its countless sensory organs registering shock at this unexpected resistance. It had never encountered prey that could withstand its ultimate attack. For the first time in its incomprehensible existence, the Leviathan knew uncertainty. Philip seized upon this moment of hesitation. He projected his defiance outward, a psychic shockwave that rippled through the metadimensional realm. The lesser xenothalids scattered before this onslaught of pure human will, their form-shifting bodies dispersing into clouds of confused protoplasm. The apex Leviathan, however, held its ground. It gathered its vast energies for one final cataclysmic assault. Reality itself seemed to warp and buckle as the creature prepared to unleash forces that could reshape entire universes. Philip braced himself for impact. He knew that his next actions would determine not just his fate, but potentially the fate of all existence. As the xenothalid's attack built to its crescendo, Philip made his choice. He would not yield, he would not break. He would stand as the last bastion of humanity against the tides of cosmic insanity. The clash of wills reached its zenith, a conflict beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. In that moment, suspended between annihilation and perseverance, Philip Robinson faced the ultimate test of his humanity. Philip's consciousness pulsed with newfound power, a shimmering toroid of energy coalescing around his core. The once human essence now radiated frequencies that pierced through the fabric of reality itself. Each vibration sent ripples across the metadimensional expanse, challenging the very foundations of the xenothalid's dominion. The apex Leviathan recoiled, its countless sensory organs registering a threat unlike any it had encountered before. It lashed out with tendrils of pure chaos, each one a weapon designed to unravel the coherence of lesser beings. But where they struck Philip's resonant field, they found not weakness but an unyielding wall of self-affirming logic. Philip felt his awareness expand exponentially, stretching far beyond the limits of his former human comprehension. He perceived realities within realities, each one a potential battleground in this cosmic war. With a thought, he projected counter-harmonics that sliced through the xenothalid's miasmic effluvia, dispelling swaths of alien influence. As Philip's newfound power grew, so too did his understanding. He saw the xenothalids for what they truly were, not just alien invaders, but manifestations of a reality-warping paradigm that threatened the very concept of fixed existence. Their goal was not mere conquest, but the dissolution of all boundaries, all definitions, until nothing remained but an endless sea of chaotic potential. With this realization came a surge of renewed purpose. Philip focused his will, condensing his essence into razor-sharp lances of pure ontological negation. These thought weapons streaked across the non-Euclidean battlefield, piercing the Leviathan's defenses and disrupting its internal logic. The zenithalid howled in a frequency that shattered nearby dimensional barriers. It retaliated with a barrage of cyclopean nightmares, each one a self-contained apocalypse designed to overwhelm Philip's sanity. But where once such horrors would have broken him, Philip now stood firm, his transcendent consciousness immune to such primitive attacks. Back and forth they clashed, two cosmic forces locked in a dance of creation and destruction. Philip's human identity became a distant memory, replaced by something far greater, a living embodiment of coherence and self-affirmation in a universe teetering on the brink of absolute chaos. As the battle raged on, Philip sensed a shift in the underlying fabric of reality. The very concepts of existence and non-existence began to blur, their boundaries eroding under the strain of this primal conflict. He knew that the outcome of this struggle would determine far more than just his own fate. It would shape the fundamental nature of reality itself for eons to come. With this knowledge driving him forward, Philip marshaled his energies for another assault against the zenithalid Leviathan. The cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next move in this game of cosmic chess. The cosmic battlefield pulsed with unimaginable energies as Philip's newfound power coalesced. His essence, once a mere spark of human consciousness, now radiated with the intensity of 1 trillion suns. The hyperspatial manifolds at his core spun faster, their gyrations sending waves of purifying force across the metadimensional expanse. Philip felt the weight of existence itself pressing upon him. Each thought, each assertion of his will rippled through layers of reality. He watched as entire universes formed and collapsed in the wake of his cosmic struggle. The zenithalid Leviathan unleashed another onslaught, its form twisting into impossible geometries. Tendrils of chaos lashed out, each one a vector of pure ontological corruption. But where they struck Philip's resonant field, they found not weakness, but an unyielding wall of self-affirming logic. Philip's mind expanded, encompassing realms of thought beyond human comprehension. He perceived the underlying structure of reality itself, the axioms and principles that governed existence. With this newfound understanding, he projected counter-harmonics that sliced through the zenithalid's miasmic effluvia. The air crackled with conflicting forces. Bolts of pure conceptual energy arced between Philip and the Leviathan. Entire pocket universes winked in and out of existence, caught in the crossfire of this titanic struggle. As the battle raged, Philip sensed a shift in the zenithalid's tactics. The alien entities began to target the very foundations of his being, attempting to corrupt the logical underpinnings of his existence. He felt their invasive presence probing at the edges of his consciousness, seeking any weakness to exploit. Philip steeled himself against this new assault. He drew upon reserves of will he never knew he possessed, weaving a shield of pure ontological certainty around his core. The zenithalid's attempts at corruption slid off this impenetrable barrier, unable to find purchase. The Leviathan howled in frustration, its cries echoing across dimensions. It redoubled its efforts, unleashing waves of reality-warping energy that threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence. Philip stood firm, his presence a beacon of stability in the churning chaos. As the conflict reached its zenith, Philip felt a new power awakening within him. It transcended mere ideation or individuality. It was the power to reshape the very nature of reality itself. With this realization came a profound sense of responsibility. He understood that the outcome of this battle would determine the fate of all existence. Philip focused his will, condensing his essence into a singular point of absolute certainty. From this locus of unshakable truth, he began to rewrite the fundamental laws of the cosmos. The Xenothalids' attempts at corruption and chaos found themselves bound by new rules, their chaotic nature constrained by Philip's assertions of order. The battlefield itself began to change, conforming to Philip's will. Where once there was chaos and disorder, now stood pillars of pure logical consistency. The Xenothalids found their power waning, their ability to warp reality diminished in the face of Philip's unwavering certainty. As the tide of battle turned, Philip sensed the Xenothalid Leviathan preparing for one final desperate assault. He braced himself, knowing that the next moments would decide the fate of all existence. Philip's consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his former self, rippling outward through layers of reality. He felt the fabric of existence bend and reshape around him, conforming to his will. The chaos of the Xenothalid assault gave way to a new order, one defined by the immutable logic of Philip's transcendent mind. Waves of energy pulsed from his core, each one rewriting the fundamental laws of the cosmos. Where once there was disorder, now stood pillars of pure, unassailable truth. Philip watched as entire universes realigned themselves, their very foundations rebuilt, according to his new cosmic architecture. The Xenothalid Leviathan, once a behemoth of cosmic horror, now writhed in impotent fury, its massive form contorted and twisted, desperately trying to maintain coherence in a reality that no longer acknowledged its existence. Philip observed dispassionately as the creature's countless appendages began to dissolve, unable to sustain themselves in the face of his overwhelming ontological dominance. Across infinite dimensions, Philip's influence spread like wildfire. He felt the birth of new universes, each one a perfect expression of logical consistency. In one, he watched as galaxies formed and evolved according to immutable physical laws. In another, he saw the dance of subatomic particles, their movements precisely orchestrated by unbreakable quantum rules. The remaining Xenothalids scattered before this onslaught of order. Their attempts to inject chaos into the new reality were met with swift and merciless correction. Philip watched as their twisted forms were caught in loops of self-negation, their very existence becoming a paradox that the universe could not tolerate. In the heart of this cosmic restructuring, Philip felt himself changing. His human identity, once so central to his being, now seemed a quaint relic of a bygone era. He was becoming something more, a living embodiment of cosmic law, a guardian of universal coherence. The death throes of the Xenothalid Leviathan reached a crescendo. Its vast bulk heaved and buckled, reality itself warping around it in a final, futile attempt at self-preservation. Philip extended his will, and the creature's form began to unravel at the seams. Layer by layer, the Leviathan's impossible biology broke down. Its eldritch energies, once so potent, now fizzled and died against the backdrop of Philip's new cosmic order. The creature's consciousness, alien and incomprehensible, fragmented into billions of shards, each one absorbed and neutralized by the surrounding reality. As the last vestiges of the Xenothalid threat faded away, Philip turned his attention to the newly forged cosmos. He felt the pulse of countless newborn universes, each one a testament to the triumph of order over chaos. The battle was won, but Philip knew his work was nowhere near the end. The cosmos stretched out before him, infinite in its complexity, waiting to be shaped by his transcendent will. As Philip's consciousness expanded across the cosmos, rewriting the fabric of reality, a subtle shift occurred within his core being. The transcendent power he wielded began to fluctuate, its once unassailable dominance wavering. Deep within the recesses of his mind, long-dormant neural pathways sparked to life. Memories of his human existence flooded back. The touch of a loved one's hand, the taste of morning coffee, the sound of laughter shared with friends. These seemingly mundane experiences, once taken for granted, now pulsed with profound significance. Philip's focus wavered. The pillars of cosmic order he had constructed began to tremble. Across countless dimensions, newly formed universes shuddered, their perfect logical consistency suddenly uncertain. In that moment of vulnerability, Philip felt a familiar presence probing at the edges of his consciousness. The Iridian influence, thought long vanquished, surged forward with renewed vigor. It whispered promises of power, of control over all of creation. Philip's human mind recoiled from the alien touch. He struggled to maintain his grip on the cosmic forces at his command, even as the Iridian psychotropics worked to undermine his will. No, Philip thought, his inner voice echoing across realities. I am more than this, I am human. The declaration sent ripples through the fabric of existence. Galaxies trembled, stars flickered, and the very laws of physics seemed to hold their breath. In that instant of defiance, Philip felt his humanity reassert itself. The overwhelming cosmic awareness that had threatened to consume his identity receded, leaving behind a core of unshakable human spirit. The Iridian influence, expecting to find a weakened mind ripe for domination, instead crashed against an impenetrable wall of human resilience. Philip's consciousness, tempered by the crucible of cosmic ascension, proved far more formidable than any alien force had anticipated. Raxa, observing from a distant dimension, watched in disbelief as his carefully laid plans unraveled. The human he had sought to break and remold into a tool of conquest now stood as a bulwark against his ambitions. Philip's awareness contracted, focusing inward. He felt the ebb and flow of the Iridian psychotropics within his system, their alien rhythms clashing against the steady beat of his human heart. With each pulse, he grew stronger, more centered. The cosmic power he had wielded began to change, transforming from an overwhelming flood into a controlled current. Philip no longer sought to rewrite reality wholesale, but rather to guide it, to nurture the inherent potential within each universe. Across the multiverse, the rigid order Philip had imposed began to soften. In its place, a new balance emerged, one that honored the chaotic beauty of existence while maintaining the underlying structure necessary for life to flourish. Philip opened his eyes, seeing the cosmos anew. He was no longer a dispassionate arbiter of universal law, nor was he a helpless pawn in an alien game. He had become something unique, a bridge between the human and the cosmic, a guardian of free will in a universe of infinite possibilities. The Iridian influence, still present but now harmless, served as a constant reminder of the strength he had discovered within himself. Philip smiled, a profoundly human expression that sent waves of warmth rippling across the cosmos. He turned his attention outward once more, ready to face whatever challenges the universe might present. The battle was just the beginning, but Philip Robinson, once an ordinary man from Earth, now stood as humanity's greatest. Philip Robinson's awareness expanded, engulfing the cosmos in a tide of consciousness. The fabric of reality bent to his will, conforming to the new order he imposed. Galaxies realigned, stars pulsed in perfect rhythm, and the fundamental forces of the universe danced to his silent commands. As his power grew, Philip felt a presence beside him. Raxa, once his adversary, now a partner in this cosmic reshaping. Together, they reached out across the expanse of space and time, their combined will reshaping existence itself. "We are become gods," Raxa's thoughts echoed through Philip's mind. Philip nodded, his consciousness stretching to encompass entire galactic superclusters, not gods, caretakers, guardians of a new reality. They worked in tandem, weaving strands of possibility into a tapestry of absolute order. Chaos withered before their combined might, replaced by perfect crystalline structure. The universe hummed with newfound harmony, every atom and quark aligned to their grand design. But as Philip exerted his will over creation, he felt a disquieting shift within himself. His human identity, once so central to his being, began to fade like mist before the rising sun. Memories of Earth, of family and friends, grew distant and indistinct. "Raxa," Philip called out, his voice resonating across dimensions, "I'm losing myself." The alien entity's response was cold, implacable. "It is necessary. To reshape reality, we must transcend our former selves." Philip's consciousness wavered, caught between his fading humanity and the vast impersonal power that threatened to consume him. He reached out, grasping at the fleeting fragments of his past. In that moment of vulnerability, the Iridian influence surged forward, seeping into the cracks of his psyche. It whispered promises of even greater power, of total dominion over all of creation. Philip recoiled, his legs shaking from the alien touch. He fought to maintain his grip on the cosmic forces at his command, even as the Iridian psychotropics worked to undermine his will. The universe trembled, caught in the throes of this titanic inner struggle. Stars flickered, galaxies shuddered, and the very laws of physics seemed to hold their breath, awaiting the outcome of this battle for Philip Robinson's soul. The rebel flagship lurched violently as it plunged towards Gehenna's outer defensive rings. Philip braced himself against the bulkhead, his armored boots magnetizing to the deck plating. Around him, a cadre of elite operatives checked their weapons one final time. 30 seconds to hot drop, the ship's AI announced, its synthetic voice barely audible over the cacophony of battle raging outside. Philip's HUD flashed with incoming data streams, highlighting their target, a massive, pulsating structure that dominated the nearest habitation ring. Even from this distance, he could see the writhing biomechanical tendrils that snaked across its surface. "That's our primary objective," he subvocalized to his team. "The xenogamic synthesis hub. We neutralize it at all costs." The bay doors hissed open, revealing the hellscape beyond. Blinding flashes of weapons fire crisscrossed the void, punctuated by silent explosions as ships on both sides met their doom. Through it all, Philip could make out the looming bulk of Gehenna Apex. Philip launched himself into the abyss, his suit's thrusters flaring to life. The rest of his team followed, forming a tight formation as they hurtled towards the xenophile stronghold. Energy beams lanced past them, close enough that Philip could feel the heat through his armor. Philip's targeting systems locked onto the approaching xenophile interceptors. He raised his neutron lancer, the weapon humming with barely contained power. "Engage at will. Don't let them pin us down." The space around them erupted in a furious exchange of fire. Philip's lancer spat coherent streams of neutrons, punching through the lead fighter's shields and reducing it to a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. His team scattered, each member becoming a lethal pinpoint of destruction as they carved a path through the xenophile defenders. But for every enemy they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We're not going to make it at this rate," Philip growled, watching as more xenophile ships poured from launch bays along Gehenna's rings. Just then, a massive explosion lit up Philip's field of vision. One of Demiurge's capital ships had rammed itself into a xenophile dreadnought, clearing a momentary path through the defenses. "This is our window. Push through now." Philip redlined his suit's thrusters, leading the charge towards the gap in Gehenna's defenses. Warning klaxons blared in his helmet as the armor's heat sinks struggled to keep up with the stress. They plunged through curtains of debris and energy discharges, the malformed bulk of the synthesis hub growing larger with each passing second. Philip could now make out grotesque details. Pulsating flesh melded seamlessly with cold alloys, creating an abomination that defied natural law. "Prepare for hard landing," Philip shouted as they approached the facility's outer shell. "Breach charges ready." His boots slammed into the undulating surface of the xenogamic hub, maglocks engaging to keep him anchored. The rest of his team landed in a rough semicircle around him, already setting their charges. Philip's suit sensors screamed warnings about the toxic atmosphere and reality-warping energies emanating from within the structure. He pushed the alerts aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Charges set. Fire in the hole." The explosion ripped a jagged hole in the hub's carapace. Philip didn't hesitate, plunging into the nightmare that awaited within. The stench of chemicals and corrupted flesh assaulted his senses even through the suit's filters. "Epsilon Company, this is Philip," he transmitted on a secure channel. "We've breached the primary synthesis hub, beginning our push to the central core. Follow our signal and reinforce as soon as you can punch through." With that, Philip raised his weapon and advanced deeper into the pulsating heart of Gehenna Apex, ready to face whatever horrors the Xenophiles had bred within its twisted halls. Philip's neutron lancer blazed to life, spitting a searing beam of concentrated particles at the nearest Xenophile mech. The energy discharge slammed into its armored carapace, carving a molten furrow across its chest plate. Alarms blared as the ring's atmosphere ignited, filling the air with acrid smoke. "Scatter and find cover!" Philip barked through his team's comm channel. His remaining squad members darted in different directions, diving behind twisted debris and structural pillars as the Xenophile forces opened fire. A hail of ion bolts and shredder rounds tore through the space Philip had occupied moments before. He rolled behind a fallen section of bulkhead, feeling the heat of near misses singe his armor. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of his team returning fire, their weapons flashing in the crimson-tinged gloom. "Joensen on your six," Philip shouted as he saw a bipedal mech stomping towards his comrade's position. He leaned out from cover, squeezing off another burst from his lancer. The beam caught the mech in its leg joint, sending it crashing to the deck in a shower of sparks. The cacophony of battle was deafening. Energy weapons shrieked, armor plates buckled and tore, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the firefight. Philip's HUD flashed constant warnings about radiation levels and structural instabilities. As he dove to a new position, Philip's gaze swept across the vast chamber. Beyond the immediate battle, he saw more security forces mobilizing. Doors slid open along the walls, disgorging fresh waves of Xenophile defenders. "We need to push deeper into the facility," Philip called out, "before they can completely box us in." He spotted a gap in the enemy lines, a narrow corridor leading towards the heart of the synthesis hub. Activating his suit's targeting systems, Philip painted the route for his team. "Suppressing fire on my mark," he ordered, readying a plasma grenade. 3, 2, 1, mark! Philip hurled the grenade high over the Xenophile lines. It detonated in a blinding flash, momentarily disrupting the mech's sensors. In that instant of confusion, Philip and his team sprang into action. They sprinted across the open ground, weapons blazing. Philip's lancer carved through 2 more mechs as he ran, their superheated remains crashing to the deck behind him. He felt the impact of return fire against his armor, his suit's integrity alarms screaming in protest. Ahead, the corridor entrance loomed. Philip skidded to a halt just inside, providing covering fire as his squad mates rushed past him. Jensen was the last to make it, his armor scorched and smoking. With a grinding screech, emergency blast doors slammed shut, cutting off pursuit. For a moment there was relative quiet, broken only by the labored breathing of Philip's team and the distant rumble of battle. "Status report," Philip demanded, scanning his squad. They were battered but alive, their armor pitted and scarred from the fierce exchange. "Still in the fight, sir," Jensen replied, voice tight with pain. "But we've got to keep moving. Won't take them long to burn through that door." Philip nodded, turning his attention to the corridor stretching before them. The walls pulsed with an unsettling organic sheen, lined with twisting conduits that carried unknown fluids deeper into the facility. "All right, people," Philip said, hefting his lancer. "We've made it inside. Now let's find that central core and shut this abomination down for good." With renewed purpose, Philip led his team deeper into the xenogamic synthesis hub, the horrors of Gehenna Apex awaiting them at every turn. The neutron lancer's beam pierced the birthing orb, its energy tearing through layers of viscous protomatter. Philip's visor automatically darkened as the chamber erupted in a blinding flash. The actinic lance bored deeper, igniting chain reactions within the xenogamic matrix. Tendrils of corrupted flesh writhed and thrashed, lashing out in frenzied death throes. One whipped past Philip's head, missing him by mere centimeters. He held steady, keeping the lancer trained on its target as the orb's surface began to bubble and boil. "Keep those beams locked!" Philip shouted over the cacophony of screeching biomatter and crackling energy discharges. "We need sustained fire to trigger a critical reaction." His team responded, their weapons joining his in a concentrated barrage. the air filled with the scent of ozone and burning alien tissue as their combined firepower hammered the writhing abomination. Suddenly the orb's surface ruptured. A geyser of luminescent protoplasm erupted, showering the chamber in a rain of corrosive fluid. Philip's armor sizzled as droplets splashed against it, eating through the outer layers. "Shields up," he commanded, activating his suit's energy barrier. The rest of the team followed suit, their forms shimmering as protective fields snapped into place. The birthing matrix convulsed, its pulsations growing more erratic. Fissures spread across its surface, leaking streams of radiant energy. Philip's scanner shrieked warnings of mounting instabilities. "It's going critical," Jensen yelled, his voice barely audible over the din. "We need to pull back." Philip shook his head, teeth clenched. "Not yet. We have to ensure total destruction." He pushed his lancer to its limits, the weapon's casing growing hot in his hands. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought to maintain aim, the chamber shaking violently around them. The orb's surface began to fold in on itself, collapsing into impossible geometries. Reality seemed to warp and twist, the very fabric of space-time buckling under the strain of the matter-antimatter reaction. They retreated, half running, half stumbling as the chamber's floor heaved beneath their feet. Behind them, the birthing matrix imploded with a thunderous crack, releasing a shockwave of unimaginable force. Philip felt the blast lift him off his feet, hurling him towards the accessway. He crashed hard against the deck, his armor absorbing most of the impact. Scrambling to his knees, he saw the massive umbilical beginning to collapse. "Go, go, go!" he urged his team forward, providing covering fire as chunks of biomechanical debris rained down around them. They sprinted through the collapsing tunnel, the destruction of the birthing chamber nipping at their heels. The actinic beam from Philip's neutron lance sliced through the birthing matrix. In an instant, the pulsating orb ruptured, unleashing a catastrophic shockwave of vaporized biomatter. Philip's armor sensors screamed warnings as the blast front approached. "Brace for impact," he shouted over the team comm. The shockwave slammed into them with titanic force. Philip's boots magnetized to the deck as his cyclonic overshield flared to life, barely holding back the tsunami of atomized xenogamic tissue. Through his polarized visor, he watched in horror as the chamber's walls began to melt and slough away. Her deafening subsonic rumble shook Philip to his core. The birthing matrix collapsed in on itself, exploding outward in a blinding gamma burst. Viscous, xenoamniotic fluid sprayed across the disintegrating chamber. "Status report," Philip called out, struggling to see through the roiling miasma. "Shields holding us barely," Jensen responded, his voice strained. "But this stuff is eating through our armor." Philip's life support systems cycled frantically, desperately trying to filter out the virulent psi-transgenic vapor. All around them, the chamber's bioarchitecture wailed in agonized death throes. "Push forward," Philip ordered, activating his thrusters. "We need to reach the epicenter." They surged deeper into the chaos, armor straining against the intensifying onslaught of bioenergetic shrapnel. Philip's telemetry visor flickered, struggling to determination coherent data through the bionically charged interference. As they neared the nexus where the xenogamic orb had once hovered, Philip's blood ran cold. The entire infrastructure was transforming, extruding fresh pseudo-tissue in grotesque accelerated mitosis. "What the hell is happening?" Ramirez gasped. Before Philip could respond, writhing tendrils of mutated tissue erupted from the deck, enclosing the team in a rapidly expanding bubble of xenogamic protosponge. Philip fired his lance, but the beam merely caused the substance to split and reform. But there was nowhere to retreat. In seconds, they were completely surrounded by a semi-permeable membrane of impossibly warped biology. Through the translucent walls, Philip watched in horror as new, indescribable forms blossomed from the chaos. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They hadn't destroyed the birthing matrix, they'd unleashed it. The chamber's energies, freed from all constraints, were rewriting the very fabric of reality around them. As eldritch maws began to form in the organic walls, gibbering with unknowable hunger, Philip felt his grasp on sanity beginning to slip. He had crossed a line, awakened something far beyond their capacity to control or comprehend. "Stand firm!" he roared, as much to himself as to his team. "We endure, regardless of the cost." Philip's desperate cry reverberated through the pulsating chamber as his body began to disintegrate. His armor, once a protective shell, now cracked and peeled away in flakes of nanomaterial. The air itself seemed to twist and warp, defying the laws of physics. Around him, the xenogamic protosphere writhed and expanded. Tendrils of impossible flesh sprouted from every surface, each one a mockery of natural biology. Philip watched in horror as one of his soldiers, Jensen, collapsed into a pool of bubbling biomass. The man's screams cut off abruptly as his vocal cords dissolved into a swarm of chittering pseudo-organisms. "Hold the line," Philip shouted, his voice distorting as it passed through layers of reality-warping energy. But there was no line left to hold. Another team member, Ramirez, fragmented into shards of living crystal, each facet reflecting a different version of her final moments. Philip's mind raced, grasping for some way to counter this escalating catastrophe. He activated his neural link, attempting to broadcast a warning to any surviving forces. The signal dissolved into static, corrupted by the cascading waves of ontological chaos. A blinding flash seared Philip's retinas as a new figure tore through the fabric of spacetime. Demiurge, her exo-armor crackling with energy, materialized amidst the swirling maelstrom. Her synthetic voice cut through the cacophony of unreality. "Philip, do you copy? What's your status?" He struggled to form a coherent response, feeling his very thoughts begin to unravel. With supreme effort, Philip managed to transmit a burst of compressed data, a desperate SOS laden with fractured mission logs. Demiurge's posture shifted as she processed the information. "By the Archons, you've done more than disrupt their operations. This is a full-scale reality breach." As she spoke, another rebel team phased into view, only to be immediately consumed by a wave of pseudo-matter. Their screams echoed across multiple dimensions before fading into an unsettling silence. The truth hit Philip like a physical blow. His mission, his crusade against the Xenophiles, had unleashed something far worse than he could have imagined. This wasn't just destruction, it was the unraveling of existence itself. Demiurge's form began to flicker and distort. "Philip, we've triggered a cascade event. The barriers between realities are collapsing. This goes beyond anything we've encountered before." Philip felt his consciousness stretching, fragmenting across infinite potential states. In that moment of cosmic awareness, he understood the full scope of his actions. The Xenophiles' experiments had been a pale shadow of the horrors he had now unleashed. As his body dissolved into the surging tide of unreality, Philip's final thoughts coalesced into a single, haunting realization. His voice, now barely recognizable, transmitted one last message across the collapsing multiverse. "I have opened the abyss." The words hung in the air, an epitaph for a universe consuming itself in an orgy of impossible biology and shattered physics. Philip's essence scattered, becoming one with the cacophony of existence unbound. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.